The dining room was immaculate. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, catching the afternoon light and scattering it across white marble floors. 8 guests sat around a mahogany table that could seat 12, their laughter echoing off the walls as they sipped wine from glasses that cost more than most people earned in a week. At the far end of the room, near the kitchen entrance, stood a woman in a plain gray uniform. Her name was Lisa, and she was refilling water glasses with the kind of invisible efficiency that wealthy people had come to expect from their staff. She moved quietly, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, her eyes downcast. "Oh God, not the tap water again," Jessica Monroe said loudly, waving her hand dismissively as Lisa approached. "Bring us the Perrier, for heaven's sake. What do we pay you for?" Lisa paused, nodded once, and turned back toward the kitchen without a word. "I swear, Brandon," Jessica continued, addressing her husband at the head of the table, "I don't know where you found her. She barely speaks English." The guests tittered politely. One woman, dripping in diamonds, leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her hand. They both glanced at Lisa's retreating figure and smirked. Brandon Monroe, a stocky man in his mid-40s with thinning hair and an expensive watch, shrugged. "The agency sent her. She's cheap, Jess. That's what matters right now." "Cheap is right," Jessica muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at those shoes. Are those from a thrift store?" More laughter rippled around the table. Lisa heard every word as she stood in the kitchen, filling a crystal pitcher with bottled water from the refrigerator. Her hands were steady. Her face showed nothing. She had heard worse in the 3 months she had worked here, and she would hear worse still before this was over. But that was exactly the point. To understand how Lisa came to be standing in that kitchen, dressed in a maid's uniform while wealthy people mocked her shoes, you need to go back 18 months, to a gray morning in November when she received a phone call that changed everything. Lisa Hayes was 29 years old then, living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon, working as a legal assistant at a small law firm. She had moved there 6 years earlier after graduating with a degree in business administration from a state university. Her life was quiet, predictable, and carefully managed. She paid her bills on time, maintained a small circle of friends, and called her father every Sunday evening without fail. Thomas Hayes had raised Lisa alone after her mother died of cancer when Lisa was just 7. He had been a real estate developer, a quiet man who built his fortune slowly and methodically over 4 decades. While other developers chased high-profile projects and media attention, Thomas focused on quality properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. He bought buildings that needed work, renovated them with care, and either sold them at a profit or kept them as long-term rentals. "Never show all your cards, Lisa," he used to tell her when she was young, sitting at their kitchen table while he reviewed property documents. "The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful." Lisa had absorbed these lessons without fully understanding them. Her father dressed simply, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and lived in a house that was comfortable but not ostentatious. Most people who met him assumed he was a middle-class contractor, maybe a building inspector. They had no idea he owned 17 properties across 3 states, worth a combined total of nearly $40 million. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Lisa was at her desk, reviewing discovery documents for a personal injury case, when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. "Is this Lisa Hayes?" a man's voice asked. "Speaking," she said. "Miss Hayes, this is Dr. Richard Caldwell from Providence Hospital. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Your father was brought to our emergency room about an hour ago. He suffered a massive heart attack while at a property showing. We did everything we could, but he didn't survive. I'm very sorry." The room seemed to tilt. Lisa gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles going white. "What?" she whispered. "No, that's not. He was fine. I talked to him Sunday. He was fine." "I'm so sorry," Dr. Caldwell repeated gently. "Is there someone who can drive you here? You shouldn't be alone right now." Lisa didn't remember much about the rest of that day. She knew she called her closest friend, Emily, who came and drove her to the hospital. She knew she identified her father's body in a sterile room that smelled of disinfectant. She knew she signed papers, answered questions, and moved through the world like a ghost. The funeral was small. Thomas hadn't been a social man, and most of his business associates were just that, associates, not friends. Lisa stood beside his casket in the rain and wondered how a man who had built so much could leave so little trace in the lives of other people. It was only when she met with his estate attorney, Gerald Pritchard, that she began to understand the scope of what her father had left behind. Gerald was in his 60s, with silver hair and a kind face lined with experience. He invited Lisa to his office 2 weeks after the funeral and offered her coffee, which she declined. Her hands were already shaking. "Your father was a remarkable man," Gerald began, opening a thick folder on his desk. "Very private, very careful. He and I worked together for over 20 years. He trusted very few people, Lisa, but he trusted me with this." "With what?" Lisa asked. Her voice sounded hollow in her own ears. Gerald slid a document across the desk. "This is your father's estate. As his only child, you are the sole beneficiary." Lisa scanned the pages, her eyes catching on numbers that didn't make sense. Property addresses in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco. Assessed values in the millions. Bank accounts with balances that made her dizzy. "I don't understand," she said finally. "This says he owned. This can't be right. This says he owned 17 properties worth almost $40 million. $38.7 million, to be precise," Gerald confirmed. "Plus liquid assets of just over $2 million in various accounts. Your father was a wealthy man, Lisa. He lived modestly by choice, but he built an impressive portfolio over his lifetime." Lisa stared at the papers in her hands. "Why didn't he tell me? All these years, he lived in that little house, drove that old car. Why?" Gerald leaned back in his chair. "Your father believed in discretion. He saw how wealth changed people, made them targets, or made them arrogant. He wanted you to grow up normal, to understand the value of work and character. He planned to tell you everything when you turned 30. He wanted you to be mature enough to handle it responsibly. He died 2 months before my 30th birthday," Lisa said quietly. "I know. I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lisa looked up, her eyes red but her voice steady. "What happens now?" "Now," Gerald said, "you inherit everything. The properties, the accounts, the business. You'll need to decide what to do with it all. Some of the properties are rented, generating monthly income. Others are vacant. One in particular." He pulled out another document. "This one might interest you." Lisa took the paper. It was a property listing for a mansion in an upscale neighborhood outside Seattle. The address was familiar, though she couldn't place why. The house was massive, 5 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms, sitting on 2 acres of manicured grounds. The estimated value was $4.2 million. "This is currently leased to a family named Monroe," Gerald explained. "Brandon and Jessica Monroe. They've been renting it for 3 years now, paying $12,000 a month. Their lease is up for renewal in 18 months. $12,000 a month?" Lisa repeated, stunned. "And they're renting?" "Wealthy people rent for all sorts of reasons. Tax purposes, flexibility, avoiding maintenance costs. The Monroes wanted to live in this particular neighborhood for business networking, but couldn't afford to buy. Your father agreed to a 3-year lease with an option to renew." Lisa studied the photo of the mansion. Something stirred in her chest, though she couldn't name it. "What are they like?" "The Monroes." Gerald hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your father mentioned them occasionally. He found them, trying. They complained frequently about every small issue. They were often late with rent payments, always with elaborate excuses. Your father tolerated it because the property was expensive to maintain empty, and they did eventually pay. But he told me once that they treated him with very little respect. Called him at all hours, spoke to him dismissively, acted as though they were doing him a favor by living there. Did they know he owned other properties? Lisa asked. No. Your father presented himself as simply the landlord of that one house. He never discussed his other holdings with tenants. He believed it was none of their business. Lisa looked at the photo again, at the sprawling mansion with its perfect landscaping and three-car garage. An idea was forming in her mind, strange and impulsive and completely unlike her usual careful nature. Gerald, she said slowly, what if I wanted to live in that house? During the next 18 months, before their lease expires. Gerald blinked. Live there? But it's rented. The Monroes could use household help, I imagine. A house that size must be difficult to maintain. Gerald stared at her. You want to apply to work as their maid? Not exactly. I want to observe them. I want to understand who these people are before I decide whether to renew their lease. My father taught me that character matters more than money, that how people treat others when they think there's no consequence reveals who they truly are. Lisa's voice grew stronger as she spoke. If I show up as the landlord's daughter, the new owner, they'll perform. They'll be polite and careful, and I'll never see the truth. But if I'm just the help? Someone they think is beneath them? I'll see exactly who they are. Lisa, Gerald said carefully, I understand the impulse, but this is highly unusual. You're a wealthy woman now. You don't need to work as a maid too. I know I don't need to, Lisa interrupted. But I want to. These people treated my father poorly. He was too kind to evict them, too forgiving. But I need to know if they deserve to stay in his house. Our house. I need to see it for myself. Gerald was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. If you're determined to do this, I can help. I'll contact the property management company we use in Seattle. They can arrange for you to be hired through a domestic placement agency. The Monroes will never know you're connected to the property ownership. Perfect, Lisa said. A small, cold smile touched her lips. And Gerald? Don't tell them the property has changed hands. Let them think everything is continuing as it was. I want them completely unsuspecting. You've thought about this, Gerald observed. My father taught me to be thorough, Lisa replied. 3 months later, Lisa stood in the kitchen of the Seattle mansion, wearing a gray uniform and comfortable shoes, while Jessica Monroe complained about the bottled water. The transformation hadn't been easy. Lisa had quit her job at the law firm, told her friends she was taking time off to process her grief and find herself. She'd rented a small studio apartment in Seattle under her mother's maiden name, Clark. She'd registered with a domestic employment agency and interviewed for the position as Lisa Clark, 29, experienced in housekeeping and property maintenance. The Monroes, desperate for affordable help and too proud to admit they couldn't really afford a full-time maid at market rates, had hired her within a week. Brandon Monroe was a financial consultant, or at least that's what he called himself. In reality, he advised small business owners on investments and took a percentage of their portfolios. He had an office downtown but seemed to work from home more often than not, usually in his study with the door closed, talking loudly on phone calls about opportunities and margins. Jessica Monroe didn't work at all. She'd been a real estate agent before they married, but she'd given it up to focus on maintaining their lifestyle and building social connections. In practice, this meant shopping, hosting dinner parties, and meeting friends for overpriced lunches. They had 2 children, both away at expensive private colleges. From what Lisa gathered from overheard phone conversations, the tuition bills were a constant source of stress, though the Monroes would never admit it publicly. The house itself was as beautiful as the photos suggested. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden, a kitchen with professional-grade appliances. Lisa's bedroom was in the basement level, a small space that had probably been intended as a guest room or office. It was adequate but impersonal, which suited her purposes. From her first day, the Monroes made clear what they thought of her. Jessica gave her orders with barely concealed impatience, pointing out dust on surfaces that were already clean, complaining about the way Lisa folded towels or arranged flowers. Brandon ignored her completely unless he wanted something, then barked requests without looking up from his phone. Get me a coffee. Black, no sugar. And make sure it's hot this time. The guest bathroom needs cleaning. I don't know what you do all day, but it clearly isn't enough. We're having people over tonight. Try to stay out of sight. They don't need to see the help hovering around. Lisa absorbed it all without reaction. She cleaned, she cooked simple meals when asked, she restocked supplies and maintained the property. And she watched. She watched how Jessica spent hours getting ready for lunches with friends, trying on 6 different outfits and leaving the rejected ones in a heap on the bedroom floor for Lisa to hang up. She watched how Brandon left coffee cups on every surface, dropped his clothes wherever he took them off, and never once said thank you. She watched how they talked about money constantly while pretending they had plenty. Jessica complained about the cost of everything while buying designer handbags. Brandon bragged about his investment prowess to guests, while Lisa overheard him arguing with credit card companies about payment extensions. But what struck her most was how they talked about the house itself. Can you believe the landlord wants to schedule an inspection? Jessica said to a friend during one lunch gathering, her voice carrying from the dining room to the kitchen where Lisa was washing dishes. As if we're going to damage his precious property. We've been perfect tenants. Has he raised the rent? The friend asked. Not yet, but he's mentioned it. Something about market rates going up. I told Brandon we need to find out who really owns this place and negotiate directly. This property manager middleman situation is ridiculous. Who is the owner? Some old man who died last year, apparently. The property manager said the estate is still being settled. They're being very secretive about it all. Probably some greedy family members fighting over the inheritance. Jessica laughed. Well, whoever ends up with it, they'll find out we're not pushovers. We know our rights as tenants. Lisa dried a wine glass slowly, her face expressionless. Greedy family members. She filed that away. The dinner parties were the worst. The Monroes hosted 1 or 2 a month, inviting couples from Brandon's professional circle or Jessica's social network. They were elaborate affairs, catered food presented on china that Lisa had to wash by hand, wine that cost more than her supposed weekly salary, conversation that was equal parts boasting and complaining. And every single time, the guests treated Lisa like a piece of furniture. More champagne, a man in a tailored suit would demand, holding up his empty glass without looking at her. Is this organic? A woman in pearls asked, poking at the appetizers Lisa arranged on a platter. I only eat organic. You should have asked. Tell the help to turn down the music, someone else said to Jessica, as if Lisa couldn't hear. Jessica always laughed, always agreed. Lisa, the music. Fix it. Lisa would nod, adjust the volume, and return to her position by the kitchen entrance, ready to refill glasses or clear plates the moment they were empty. But the moment that crystallized everything, the moment that confirmed what Lisa already knew, came 4 months into her employment. It was a Saturday evening in late spring. The Monroes were hosting what Jessica called a small gathering, only 6 guests instead of the usual 8 or 10. Brandon had been tense all day, pacing the house, taking calls in hushed tones behind closed doors. Lisa heard fragments as she worked. They can't do that. The contract was clear. I need more time. This is going to destroy me. By the time the guests arrived, Brandon had composed himself, putting on the jovial host persona he wore for company. But Lisa could see the strain around his eyes, the way he drank his scotch too fast and refilled it too often. The evening proceeded normally until dessert, when Jessica brought up the topic that had apparently been weighing on both of them. We got a letter from the property management company, Jessica announced to the table, her voice tight. They're reminding us that our lease expires in 8 months. They want to discuss renewal terms. One of the guests, a woman named Patricia, raised her eyebrows. Are they raising the rent? They haven't said yet, but I'm sure they will, Brandon said darkly. This whole situation is absurd. We've been model tenants for 3 years, and they treat us like we're some kind of risk. Have you thought about buying? Another guest asked. The market is strong right now. You could probably get a good mortgage rate. Brandon and Jessica exchanged a glance. Lisa, standing near the sideboard, saw the flash of something between them. Panic, maybe. Or shame. We're considering all our options, Brandon said carefully. But with both kids in college and some recent investment setbacks, the timing isn't ideal for a purchase right now. Investment setbacks? Patricia leaned forward, curious. Brandon, what happened? I thought you were the expert. Brandon's face darkened. It's complicated. Some opportunities that didn't pan out. The market can be unpredictable, even for professionals. Meaning he lost a lot of money, Jessica said, her voice sharp. Lisa noticed she was on her third glass of wine. Meaning we're barely keeping up with rent as it is, much less thinking about buying. But we can't let anyone know that, can we, Brandon? That would ruin your reputation as the brilliant financial advisor. The table went silent. The other guests looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances. Brandon's jaw clenched. Jessica, not now. Why not now? Jessica set her glass down hard enough that wine sloshed over the rim. These are our friends. They should know the truth. We're drowning, Patricia. We're paying $12,000 a month for this house we can't afford, trying to keep up appearances so Brandon's clients don't lose faith in him. Meanwhile, the landlord, whoever the hell that is now, could evict us at any moment and we'd have nowhere to go. We're not going to be evicted, Brandon said through gritted teeth. We have rights. And 8 months is plenty of time to figure something out. Figure what out? Jessica demanded. We're already behind on credit cards. The college bills are killing us. Your business is barely breaking even. What exactly are you going to figure out? Enough, Brandon said, his voice hard. He looked around the table, forcing a smile. Jessica's had too much wine. Let's move to the living room for coffee, shall we? The guests murmured agreement and began to rise, clearly eager to escape the tension. Lisa started clearing plates, moving efficiently around the table. As she reached for Jessica's wine glass, Jessica suddenly looked up at her, as if seeing her for the first time all evening. You, Jessica said. You stand there every night, listening to everything. Do you think this is funny? Do you go home and laugh about the rich people and their problems? Lisa met her eyes calmly. No, ma'am, she said quietly. I don't laugh about anyone's problems. Ma'am, Jessica repeated mockingly. So polite. So humble. I bet you love this, don't you? Serving people who have more than you ever will. Jessica, Patricia said uncomfortably. She's just doing her job. Her job, Jessica said. Right. Her job that we can barely afford to pay for, but we have to keep her because what would people think if we didn't have help? She looked back at Lisa. You're probably stealing from us, aren't you? They all do. Taking food, taking cash, taking whatever they can get. Lisa's hands remained steady on the stack of plates she held. I've never taken anything that wasn't mine, she said evenly. Of course you'd say that, Jessica said. She waved her hand dismissively. Just get out. Go clean something. Earn your pittance. Lisa turned and walked toward the kitchen, her spine straight, her face calm. Behind her, she heard Patricia say quietly, Jessica, that was cruel. She'll survive, Jessica muttered. People like her always do. They don't have feelings like we do. Lisa placed the plates carefully in the sink and stood there for a moment, her hands braced against the counter. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. She was not the loudest person in this house. But she was, without question, the most powerful. And in 8 months, the Monroes would finally understand that. The months that followed settled into a tense routine. Jessica's drunken outburst became an unspoken thing between them, never acknowledged but always present. Jessica was, if anything, even more demanding afterward, as if trying to reassert her authority. Brandon barely looked at Lisa anymore, but his phone calls grew more desperate as lease renewal time approached. Lisa maintained her role perfectly. She was quiet, efficient, invisible. But she was also documenting everything. Every late rent payment. There had been 3 in the past 6 months. Every time the Monroes violated their lease terms, smoking inside despite the no-smoking clause, making unauthorized modifications to the garden, hosting events that exceeded the occupancy limits outlined in their contract. She worked with Gerald on the phone during her rare hours off, reviewing her options. "You don't owe them anything," Gerald reminded her during one call. "This is your property. Your father built this. You have every right to refuse renewal." "I know," Lisa said. "But I want to do this right. I want them to understand why." "Why does that matter?" Gerald asked gently. Lisa was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Because they thought they could treat people however they wanted without consequences. Because they believed being tenants gave them power over a landlord they never bothered to respect. Because my father died and they didn't even know it, didn't even care enough to ask who they were paying rent to now. They just assumed it didn't matter." "So this is about teaching them a lesson?" "This is about showing them the truth," Lisa corrected. "That wealth and property don't make you powerful. Character does. Respect does. My father knew that. I want them to learn it." Gerald sighed. "All right. How do you want to handle the lease expiration?" "Schedule a formal renewal meeting," Lisa said. 2 weeks before the lease ends. Tell them the new owner will be present to discuss terms. Make it official, with lawyers and documentation. "And you'll reveal yourself then?" "I will." "Lisa," Gerald said, "you know they're going to be angry. They might fight this legally, claim discrimination or wrongful eviction or—" "They have no case," Lisa interrupted. "I've read the lease backwards and forwards. Everything is documented. They've been late on payments, they've violated multiple clauses, and most importantly, I'm not obligated to renew. This is a month-to-month arrangement after the initial lease term. I'm within my rights to end it with proper notice, which I'm providing." "True," Gerald admitted. "But anger and legal standing are 2 different things. Be prepared for this to get ugly." "I've been preparing for this for 8 months," Lisa said quietly. "I'm ready." The notice arrived on a Monday morning in September, 2 weeks before the lease expiration date. Lisa was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard Jessica's shriek from the office where they kept their mail. "Brandon! Brandon, get in here right now." Brandon came running, still in his bathrobe. "What? What is it?" "Read this." Jessica thrust a letter at him. "They want a formal meeting. The owner is going to be there. Brandon, they're going to evict us." Lisa continued scrambling eggs, listening. Brandon scanned the letter, his face going pale. "It says meeting to discuss renewal terms. That doesn't necessarily mean—" "Of course it means eviction." Jessica was pacing now, her voice rising. "Why else would the owner suddenly show up after all this time? They're going to jack up the rent to something we can't afford, or just kick us out entirely." "Oh God, where are we going to go? We can't afford anything else in this neighborhood." "We'll fight it," Brandon said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're model tenants. We have rights." "Model tenants who are 2 months behind on rent," Jessica said bitterly. "I told you we should have prioritized that instead of your stupid golf club membership." "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'm stating facts. We're about to be homeless because you couldn't swallow your pride and admit we need to downsize." They argued for another 10 minutes before Brandon stormed off to his office and Jessica retreated upstairs. Lisa plated the eggs and toast, covered them with foil, and left them on the counter. No one came to eat them. The next 2 weeks were the most tense Lisa had experienced in the house. Brandon hired a lawyer, had angry phone consultations behind closed doors. Jessica cycled between rage and tears, called friends to complain about the heartless landlord who was destroying their lives. They snapped at Lisa even more than usual, though now with a distracted quality, as if she was just something else in the house not working the way they wanted. 3 days before the meeting, Jessica cornered Lisa in the hallway. "You're going to need to find a new position," Jessica said abruptly. "When we move out, if we're forced to move, we won't be taking staff with us. So start looking now. I'd hate for you to be unemployed." The concern was obviously fake, but Lisa nodded. "I understand, ma'am. Thank you for letting me know." Jessica studied her for a moment. You're very calm about this. Don't you care that you're losing your job? Things change, Lisa said quietly. I've learned not to get too attached to any one situation. Well, that's a depressing way to live, Jessica said. Then she walked away. Lisa watched her go and thought, you have no idea. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Gerald had arranged for it to take place in the mansion's formal dining room, the same room where Lisa had been mocked 100 times. The Monroes dressed as if they were going to court. Brandon wore his best suit, the navy one he saved for important client meetings. Jessica wore a cream-colored dress and pearls, her hair professionally styled. They looked like what they imagined powerful people looked like. Lisa served them coffee while they waited, playing her role to the very end. That will be all, Jessica said dismissively, not looking at her. Go clean the guest rooms or something. We don't need staff present for this meeting. Actually, Gerald's voice came from the doorway. I'd prefer if she stayed. Gerald entered the room, carrying a leather briefcase, followed by another man in his 30s wearing a crisp suit. The Monroes stood immediately. Gerald Pritchard. Gerald introduced himself, shaking their hands. I'm the estate attorney handling this property. This is my associate, Daniel Reeves. Thank you for meeting with us. Of course, Brandon said, his professional mask sliding into place. Though I have to say, we're confused about the urgency. We've been good tenants, paid rent on time. With some exceptions, Gerald said mildly, sitting down. But we can discuss that in detail. Please sit. The Monroes sat. Lisa remained standing near the sideboard, in her customary position. I thought the property owner would be here? Jessica said, looking around. The letter said. The owner is here, Gerald said. They looked at the door. Then at Gerald. Then, in confusion, around the room. Lisa stepped forward, away from the sideboard. She walked calmly to the empty chair at the head of the table, the position Brandon usually occupied during their dinner parties, and sat down. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Jessica laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. What are you doing? We said you weren't needed for this meeting. Lisa folded her hands on the table and met Jessica's eyes directly for the first time in 8 months. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, no longer the deferential murmur she'd used as the maid. I'm exactly where I need to be, she said. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Lisa Hayes. I am the sole owner of this property, and I'm here to discuss the termination of your lease. The silence that followed was profound. Brandon's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and, finally, shock. That's not possible, he said hoarsely. You work for us. You're the maid. I've been working in my own house, Lisa corrected. Observing you as tenants. My father, Thomas Hayes, was your previous landlord. When he died last year, this property passed to me. Rather than introduce myself immediately, I chose to see firsthand what kind of people you were. How you treated others. How you treated property that didn't belong to you. Jessica's face had gone white. This is a joke. This is some kind of elaborate. It's not a joke, Gerald said firmly. He opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. These are the property deeds, recently transferred to Ms. Hayes upon settlement of her father's estate. These are the original lease agreements you signed with Mr. Hayes 3 years ago. And these, he placed another stack of papers on the table, are documented lease violations, late payments, and complaints from your time as tenants. Daniel, the associate, spoke up. You've been late on rent 3 times in the past 6 months. You've smoked inside the property despite clear prohibitions. You've made unauthorized modifications to the landscaping. You've exceeded occupancy limits during your social gatherings multiple times. Any one of these would be grounds for non-renewal under the terms of your lease. Brandon's lawyer persona kicked in. Now wait just a minute. We have rights as tenants. You can't just. I can, Lisa said calmly. This is a month-to-month lease following the expiration of your initial 3-year term. I'm required to give 30 days notice of non-renewal, which this meeting serves as. You have 30 days to vacate the property. This is discrimination. Jessica stood up, her chair scraping back loudly. You can't do this because you. Because I what? Lisa asked, her voice still calm. Because you treated me poorly? Called me names? Mocked my appearance? Implied I was a thief. She paused. Those things are certainly why I'm not sad to see you go. But they're not the legal reason I'm ending your tenancy. The legal reasons are all documented. Your lease violations, your late payments, your general disrespect for the property, and the terms you agreed to. Jessica was breathing hard, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the red flush climbing her neck. We didn't know. How could we know you were? Exactly, Lisa said, and now there was steel in her voice. You didn't know. You had no idea who I was, what I owned, what power I had. And, because you thought I was beneath you, you treated me abominably. You treated my father the same way when he was alive. I read his notes, heard his conversations with the property manager about how dismissive you were, how you called him at all hours and spoke to him like he was your servant rather than the man who owned the home you lived in. She stood now, her hands flat on the polished table. My father taught me that how you treat people when you think there's no consequence reveals your true character. You failed that test. Both of you. You mocked someone you thought was powerless. You complained about your landlord behind his back while enjoying the home he built. You lied about being model tenants while violating your lease and falling behind on payments. And you did it all while acting like you were the victims. Brandon had slumped in his chair, his face gray. We can pay, he said desperately. The back rent, I can get it to you by the end of the week. We'll stop smoking inside. We'll fix whatever needs fixing. Please, we have nowhere else to go. You had 8 months to be better tenants, Lisa said. You had 8 months to treat people with respect. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. Jessica's eyes were wet now, mascara starting to run. This is cruel. You're doing this for revenge. Because of things I said when I was drunk, when I was stressed. I'm doing this because you don't deserve to live in my father's house, Lisa said quietly. He built this property with care. He maintained it with pride. He would have wanted tenants who appreciated it, who treated it and him with respect. You're not those people. Gerald cleared his throat. The formal notice is in these documents. You have 30 days from today. We're willing to be flexible on move-out timing by a few days if needed, but the property must be vacated and returned in the condition outlined in your lease agreement by the end of next month. What about references? Brandon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll need references to rent somewhere else. Gerald looked at Lisa. She considered for a long moment. I won't lie about your tenancy, she said finally. If a future landlord contacts me, I'll tell them the facts. That you were frequently late with rent, that you violated lease terms, and that I chose not to renew. What they do with that information is up to them. It was as much mercy as she was willing to offer. Jessica made a sound between a laugh and a sob. You really did this. You actually got a job as a maid in your own house just to, what? Spy on us? Catch us being human. To see if you had enough character to deserve another chance, Lisa corrected. The answer was no. She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. For 8 months, she had been invisible in this room, standing against the wall while they laughed and drank and complained. Now they stared at her like she was a stranger, which, she supposed, she was. True power doesn't announce itself, she said quietly. It doesn't need to boast or prove anything. My father taught me that. He wore old clothes and drove an old car and let people underestimate him because he knew his worth had nothing to do with their perception. I learned the same lesson these past months. The way you treated me when you thought I had no power showed me everything I needed to know about who you really are. She opened the door and walked out, leaving them sitting in the dining room where they had mocked her so many times. Behind her, she heard Jessica start to cry in earnest. The Monroes moved out 4 weeks later. Lisa arranged to be away for the final day, spending it at her Portland apartment, which she'd kept throughout the 8 months. She didn't want to watch them pack, didn't want any final confrontation. Gerald handled the walkthrough with Daniel. He called her that evening with the report. They left it in decent condition, he said. Some minor damage to the master bedroom wall where they must have moved furniture, and the garden is a mess from their modifications, but nothing major. Security deposit will cover most of it. Good, Lisa said. They didn't say anything during the walkthrough. Jessica cried a bit. Brandon just looked defeated. They loaded everything into a moving truck and left. It's over. Thank you, Gerald. For everything. What will you do with the property now? He asked. Rent it again? Sell it. Lisa looked out the window of her Portland apartment at the city lights. I'm going to live in it, she said. It was my father's dream house, the last property he acquired before he died. I think he'd want family there, not strangers. You're moving to Seattle? I think so. There's nothing keeping me in Portland anymore. And that house, it's beautiful. It deserves to be lived in by someone who appreciates it. Your father would be proud, Gerald said quietly. After they hung up, Lisa sat in the dark for a while, thinking about the past year. The grief of losing her father, the shock of the inheritance, the strange 8 months of living as someone she wasn't in order to understand people she'd never met. She thought about Brandon and Jessica, wondered where they'd ended up, if they'd learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like that rarely did. They'd probably tell their friends they were victims of a cruel landlord, would rewrite the story to make themselves sympathetic. But Lisa knew the truth. And in the end, that was enough. Lisa moved into the Seattle mansion 6 weeks later, in late November, almost exactly a year after her father's death. She kept her job as a legal assistant, working remotely now. She didn't need the income. Her father's properties generated more than enough to live on, but she liked the routine, the normalcy. Wealth hadn't changed who she was at her core. On the anniversary of her father's death, Lisa visited his grave. She brought flowers and stood in the cold December rain, just as she had a year before. I handled the Monroe situation, she told him, speaking quietly. The way you taught me. With patience. With observation. With respect for the truth. The wind rustled through the bare trees. I hope you're proud, she said. I'm trying to honor what you built. To be worthy of it. She stood there a while longer, then walked back to her car. The mansion was waiting, warm and bright in the winter darkness. Her home. Her inheritance. Her responsibility. And this time, she was walking in through the front door. What would you have done in Lisa's situation? Would you have revealed yourself immediately, or would you have waited and watched like she did? Do you think she was justified in denying the Monroe's lease renewal, or should she have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to remember that the quiet ones often hold more power than the loudest voices in the room.